They say the Vatican is a place of light, sunlight spilling over marble colonnades, hymns rising into gold-leafed domes. But there are other rooms here, far from the pilgrim's gaze. Behind thick doors and layers of silence lie treasures that have not seen daylight in centuries. Some are relics of faith, others whispers of things too dangerous for open eyes. Tonight, we're not just visiting a city within a city, we're descending into its hidden heart. Past the frescoes, beneath the archives, to the vault set to hold history's most forbidden wonders. It's a story of devotion and ambition, of beauty and shadow tangled together. If you enjoy these quiet walks into the past, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time the clock reads for you now. Together, we'll see how deep the vault goes. Long before modern visitors queued beneath the Bernini colonnade, the Vatican was already a fortress of faith and secrecy. The Apostolic Palace, as we know it, began taking shape in the late 15th century during the reign of Pope Sixtus IV, though its origins trace back much further. For centuries, popes have gathered not only religious relics, but also artifacts of political, cultural, and at times, troubling significance. These are not displayed in St. Peter's Basilica or the Vatican museums, where millions pass each year. Instead, they are kept in chambers few will ever see, guarded as carefully as state secrets. The Vatican Secret Archives, renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019, contain documents dating back over 1,200 years, some written on parchment that has darkened with age. Yet the vault we speak of tonight is not simply a collection of letters and treaties. It is the repository for physical objects, too valuable or too controversial to be shown. Access is tightly controlled. Only authorized clergy, select scholars with special permission, and archivists can pass through the final locked doors. Here lies a part of history shielded from the world. Over time, whispers have grown of treasures so rare that their existence challenges accepted narratives. Some of these objects are said to date back to the earliest centuries of the Church. Others belong to the medieval and Renaissance eras, when the papacy held vast temporal power. Whether relic, manuscript, or weapon, each is bound to a story that stretches across borders and centuries. As we step toward the first of these treasures, we must remember that not all history is meant for every eye. What follows is drawn from records, testimony, and fragments left behind. The entrance to the Pope's private vault is not marked on any public map of the Vatican. It lies beyond the Apostolic Library, behind a set of plain wooden doors that betray nothing of what is hidden within. Historically, the area was reinforced during the reign of Pope Paul V in the early 17th century, when the papal archives and treasury were reorganized to safeguard sensitive materials. The key system is deliberately complex. 7 distinct keys are required to open the vault's final gate, each held by a different guardian. This tradition is rooted in medieval papal security protocols, a time when rival factions within and outside the Church sought to claim its treasures. Even today, the opening of the vault is a ceremonial act performed rarely and in strict privacy. Visitors must pass through layered security, including Swiss guards trained not just in ceremonial duties, but in weapons and defense. Those allowed inside often speak of the unusual stillness, as though the very walls are aware of what they protect. The air is cool and dry, maintained to preserve ancient metals, parchments, and textiles. Thick stone insulates the chamber from the bustling Vatican above. Scholars have occasionally been granted limited access for academic research, though never to the most sensitive items. In whispers and obscure references, these forbidden objects are said to embody both the faith's greatest mysteries and its most guarded controversies. Many who have walked the outer corridors claim the atmosphere changes as one draws nearer, the hum of the city replaced by a profound silence. To cross that final threshold is to enter a space where history has been deliberately frozen, untouched by light or time. Within, the first of the 7 treasures waits, sealed for generations. The first of the 7 forbidden treasures is known in whispers as the blood-stained chalice. While chalices are common in Catholic liturgy, this one is unlike any displayed in the Vatican's museums or used in sacred ceremonies. Historical records suggest it may date to the 1st century, a period when the early Christian community in Rome was still meeting in secret to avoid persecution under emperors like Nero. Some accounts claim the chalice was brought to Rome from Jerusalem by early converts, fleeing unrest after the Jewish-Roman conflicts. Its reputation comes from a dark legend preserved in medieval manuscripts stored in the Vatican archives. According to these accounts, the chalice was once used in a mass celebrated in hiding. During that service, a violent raid by Roman soldiers left several worshippers dead. Blood from the slaying is said to have splashed onto the rim and base, staining the metal permanently. Examination in later centuries revealed deep reddish discolorations that resisted all attempts at cleaning. In the 13th century, Pope Innocent III reportedly ordered the chalice secured in the papal treasury after rumors began spreading that it had miraculous or dangerous properties, depending on who told the story. Some pilgrims claimed to have visions after seeing it. Others fell gravely ill. Since the Renaissance, the chalice has been kept within a locked reliquary in the deepest part of the vault, removed only on rare occasions for internal inspection. Modern historians debate whether the object truly dates to the Apostolic Age or if it is a later creation enshrouded in myth. Regardless, its place in the Pope's vault is undisputed, and it remains an enduring symbol of how faith, legend, and tragedy can be fused into a single artifact. The journey of the blood-stained chalice into Vatican possession is a story interwoven with the fall of the Knights Templar. In the early 14th century, during the suppression of the Templars under Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France, certain relics and treasures were seized from the order's strongholds. Surviving Templar inventories, some preserved in fragments in the Vatican archives, mention a vessel of reddened metal among the items, hidden away before the arrests began in 1307. One theory suggests that a small group of Templars fled to Rome seeking sanctuary, bringing the chalice as an offering of loyalty to the Pope in hopes of sparing their lives. Whether this was an act of desperation or strategic diplomacy remains unknown, but the chalice is said to have passed directly into papal custody soon afterward. Once within the apostolic palace, it vanished from public record. Chroniclers of the time make vague references to an unholy cup that could not be destroyed. Some even suggested that it had been carried in the Holy Land during the Crusades, used in clandestine rites known only to select Templar knights. Over the centuries, a handful of scholars and archivists have claimed to have seen it during inventory checks. Descriptions vary. Some speak of a simple metal goblet with a dark patina. others of fine craftsmanship with faint engravings worn nearly smooth by time. No reliable photographs exist, and official Vatican records listed under an obscure Latin designation that reveals nothing of its legend. The lack of certainty fuels both academic debate and the fascination of those who believe the chalice connects the earliest church to the shadowed corridors of medieval intrigue. To this day, it remains sealed away, its mysteries unresolved. The second treasure, sealed within the Pope's vault, is known to select archivists as the Liber Daemonum, or the Book of Fallen Angels. While the Vatican openly acknowledges possession of countless ancient manuscripts, this particular volume has never been included in any public catalog. Scholars who study early Christian and Jewish mysticism suggest it may be a medieval Latin translation of older Aramaic or Hebrew texts, possibly linked to traditions found in the apocryphal Book of Enoch and other writings excluded from the biblical canon. The earliest credible reference to the Liber Daemonum appears in a letter dated to the late 12th century from a Benedictine abbot in northern Italy, who warned the papal court about a codex naming the princes of darkness and the manner of their undoing. The letter implies that the book had surfaced in Lombardy, brought by crusaders returning from the Levant. The manuscript allegedly contained elaborate descriptions of angelic rebellions, hierarchies of spirits, and rituals for summoning and binding them. According to Vatican tradition, Pope Alexander III ordered the book confiscated and locked away after several clerics were accused of using its contents for forbidden rites. The binding is said to be darkened goatskin, its pages thick vellum inscribed in a dense hand, accompanied by diagrams that resemble both astronomical charts and occult sigils. Over the centuries, it has been moved only a handful of times, each transfer recorded in sealed documents. In 1639, Pope Urban VIII reportedly had the book examined by the Congregation of the Index, which reaffirmed its confinement on grounds that it could endanger souls if misused. Today, the Liber Daemonum rests in a sealed chest within the innermost section of the vault, far from the eyes of the faithful, preserved more as a warning than a relic of devotion. The origins of the Liber Daemonum are clouded in speculation, but traces of its journey emerge through scattered archival clues. Some researchers believe it may have begun as a compilation of Near Eastern demonological traditions, possibly written in Greek during the late Hellenistic period, when Jewish mysticism and early Christian thought were intersecting with older Babylonian beliefs. The possibility of its creation in the Levant is strengthened by marginal notes, reportedly in Syriac script, identified during a 19th century internal review of the manuscript. Those notes hint at translations and additions made over centuries, suggesting that the book may be less a single author's work than a layered anthology of forbidden knowledge. By the time it entered Europe, likely in the wake of the First or Second Crusade, it had already acquired a reputation for danger. Monastic records from the Abbey of Monte Cassino mention a black book brought by a wounded knight from Antioch around 1100. The abbot there refused to keep it, sending it under seal to Rome. Once in papal custody, it was hidden among other prohibited works, its contents accessible only to a select few theologians and demonologists appointed by the Pope. In the early Renaissance, curiosity about angelic and demonic hierarchies saw renewed interest in such writings. This led to a brief but intense examination of the Liber Daemonum by scholars attached to the Vatican Library, though no official commentary was ever published. Some claim that certain ritual instructions in the book bear a resemblance to later grimoires circulating in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries, raising the question of whether fragments of its text escape the vault. Whether it is an historical artifact or a carefully maintained legend, the Liber Daemonum remains under lock and key, guarded as much from scholars as from the devout. The third treasure whispered about within the Pope's vault is the so-called Lens of Shadows, a relic entwined with centuries of legend and contested history. It is said to be a spearhead of iron, roughly 30 centimeters in length, darkened by age and with a faint spiral pattern along its shaft. Some believe it to be a fragment of the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Longinus, which according to Christian tradition was used by a Roman soldier to pierce the side of Christ during the crucifixion. However, unlike the relic venerated in St. Peter's Basilica or the one kept in Vienna's Hofburg Palace, this lance has no public acknowledgement. Its first reliable appearance in records is tied to the Byzantine Empire. A letter from the court of Emperor Romanos I, Lecapenus, dated to around 930, mentions the dispatch of a blessed spear fragment to Rome as a gesture of unity during tense theological negotiations. What happened afterward is not clearly documented, but by the late Middle Ages, the object surfaces in an inventory of the Vatican treasury under a coded description. Over the centuries, certain popes reportedly ordered it sealed away entirely due to unsettling claims from those who had handled it. Chroniclers speak of visions, severe fevers, or sudden changes in temperament among clerics who came into contact with the relic. In the 16th century, Pope Pius IV is said to have removed it from the treasury after reports of a bishop who collapsed moments after touching it during a private viewing. Today, it rests within a lead-lined reliquary, its existence mentioned only in internal documents and guarded by those who believe it carries both divine and dangerous force, a reminder that some relics inspire reverence and fear in equal measure. Legends surrounding the Lens of Shadows grew more elaborate during the Renaissance, when European courts and military leaders sought relics believed to grant victory in battle. Chronicles from the late 15th century tell of envoys from the Kingdom of France and the Holy Roman Empire discreetly petitioning the papal court for access to what they believed was the true spear fragment. None of these requests were granted, but the correspondence remains in the restricted section of the Vatican archives. The reluctance to share the lens may have been tied to an earlier incident recorded in a 1389 memorandum to Pope Urban VI. The document describes how the relic was briefly removed from his case for inspection by a small committee of cardinals. Shortly afterward, a violent dispute erupted among them regarding its authenticity, escalating into a physical altercation that left one cardinal injured. This event seems to have reinforced the belief that the lens was not only sacred but volatile, capable of stirring human passions to extremes. A Jesuit scholar in the 17th century, writing under an alias, claimed that the spearhead's spiral markings were of ancient Roman craftsmanship. Yet he also noted tiny engravings in Greek letters partially worn away, hinting at a Byzantine restoration centuries earlier. The combination of Roman and Byzantine elements has complicated scholarly consensus and left the artifact shrouded in uncertainty. By the 18th century, the Lens of Shadows had been relocated deeper into the vault, placed in a reliquary lined with both lead and silver to guard against corrosion. While no pope in recent history is known to have displayed it, its presence persists in whispered references among Vatican staff, a relic that embodies the enduring tension between veneration, fear, and the desire for control over history's most charged objects. The fourth treasure said to rest within the Pope's vault is a relic known as the Veil of Veritas. Unlike the more widely known Veil of Veronica, which is displayed on rare occasions to the faithful, the Veil of Veritas has never been presented to the public. Archival references suggest it is a length of finely woven linen, measuring approximately 70 by 30 centimeters, with faint markings that resemble a human face. The earliest credible mention appears in a 13th century papal inventory attributed to Pope Innocent IV, which notes a cloth of strange and fearful likeness. Scholars who have studied the wording believe this phrasing was chosen deliberately to distinguish it from relics considered wholly devotional. Some speculate it could be linked to the Mandelion, a famed relic of the Eastern Church, which vanished from Constantinople after the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The theory holds that Crusaders may have brought it to the West and, instead of presenting it openly, entrusted it to the papacy for safekeeping. In the early 15th century, during the pontificate of Pope Martin V, there is record of a sealed audience in which the veil was shown to a small group of theologians. Notes from this meeting, preserved in cipher, speak of the image seeming to change expression under certain light. While no official Vatican statement has ever confirmed such an effect, the veil has remained under the strictest guard. Conservation notes from the 19th century mention the cloth being stored between panes of rock crystal to prevent decay. Whether the Veil of Veritas is an authentic relic from the early Christian era or a medieval creation shrouded in mystery, its concealment for centuries suggests it carries an importance that reaches beyond simple piety. The circumstances under which the Veil of Veritas entered papal possession remain unclear, but fragments of historical correspondence offer possible clues. A letter dated 1210 from a Venetian merchant to his brother in Acre describes a holy cloth purchased from a Greek soldier who had fought in the sack of Constantinople. The merchant claimed the image was not painted, but appeared to have formed naturally within the weave of the linen. While there is no direct proof that this is the same veil now hidden in the Vatican, the timing and description align with later records. By the mid-13th century, Pope Innocent IV had reportedly ordered the cloth sealed in a reliquary and stored in the treasury, citing the need to protect it from those who might misuse its image for personal gain or to claim divine authority. Some accounts suggest that the veil was briefly moved during the Council of Florence in 1439, a time when the papacy sought to strengthen ties with the Eastern Church. A marginal note in the diary of a Byzantine delegate hints at having seen a face of light within linen during a private showing. In later centuries, the veil was rarely disturbed, although conservation reports from the early 1800s indicate it was examined by papal order after concerns arose about moisture damage. These examinations were carried out by trusted restorers who worked under the watch of Swiss guards. Today, the Veil of Veritas remains locked in a climate-controlled case, its exact location known to only a few within the Apostolic Palace. Whether it is a miraculous image, an ancient relic, or a masterwork of forgotten artisanship, the veil's guarded existence continues to fuel speculation among historians and theologians alike. The fifth treasure said to lie in the deepest section of the Pope's vault is the Codex Lux, an illuminated manuscript unlike any other in known church collections. It is believed to date from the late 9th century, a period when the Carolingian Renaissance was reviving scholarship and manuscript production across Europe. Unlike typical gospel books or psalters, the Codex Lux reportedly contains passages absent from the canonical scriptures, written in a blend of Latin and an archaic form of Old Church Slavonic. The earliest surviving reference appears in a catalogue compiled under Pope Sergius III, which lists an Evangelium Lucis, described as having truths concealed from the unready. The manuscript's pages are said to be of exceptionally thin vellum, decorated with gold leaf, and pigments derived from lapis lazuli, malachite, and cinnabar, indicating it was the work of master scribes with access to rare materials. Scholars who have heard second-hand accounts claim that the margins hold intricate diagrams combining biblical imagery with astronomical symbols, an unusual pairing for the era. Legends suggest the book may have been brought to Rome by missionaries returning from the Slavic lands, its contents preserved to guide those deemed capable of understanding its layered meanings. During the Renaissance, there is record of Pope Leo X ordering a discreet translation of selected sections, though this translation was never circulated beyond the papal court. In the 17th century, the Codex Lux was reportedly moved to a specially built case in the vault to shield its delicate pigments from light and air. No authenticated images exist, and the Vatican has never publicly acknowledged its existence. Whether the Codex is a lost testament, a theological commentary, or an allegorical work blending faith and science, it remains a mystery sealed behind centuries of guarded doors. The path the Codex Lux may have taken into the Vatican is pieced together from scattered references in diplomatic letters and monastic chronicles. A 12th century letter preserved in the archives of Monte Cassino Abbey records a conversation between an abbot and a papal legate concerning a book of the Eastern Light recently arrived in Rome from Moravia. This aligns with the period following the missionary work of Saints Cyril and Methodius, who had brought Christianity to the Slavic peoples in the 9th century and developed the Glagolitic script, a precursor to Cyrillic. Some theorists believe the Codex Lux could be a synthesis of Western and Eastern Christian traditions, explaining its unusual language blend. A marginal note in a 15th century Vatican inventory hints that the manuscript contains the vision of the wheel and the firmament, a possible reference to the prophetic imagery found in the book of Ezekiel, though whether this is literal scripture or allegorical writing remains unknown. The book's reputation for secrecy appears to have intensified during the Counter-Reformation, when church authorities became wary of texts that could be interpreted as supporting non-Catholic theological perspectives. According to an 18th century account from a French Jesuit who spent several years in Rome, the Codex Lux was occasionally shown to high-ranking clerics as an example of how divine truth can appear in many forms, but must be guarded against distortion. By the 19th century, its location was transferred to the innermost vault rooms, along with the church's most sensitive relics and documents. Modern requests to study the Codex have been denied without explanation, and it remains unseen except by a select few archivists bound by oath. In a world of digital reproductions and open archives, its continued confinement stands as a rare defiance against the reach of modern scholarship. The sixth treasure attributed to the Pope's vault is known as the Map of the First World, a parchment chart that predates the Age of Discovery by several centuries. Its existence is whispered of among a small circle of Vatican cartographers and historians, though it is absent from any public catalog. Based on the few surviving descriptions from internal reports, the map is drawn on cured sheepskin, approximately 1 meter in width, and bears ink faded to a warm brown with time. The earliest confirmed reference appears in a memorandum dated 1453, addressed to Pope Nicholas V, which praises a marvelous chart showing the whole of the earth under God's sky. What makes the map remarkable is that it appears to depict coastlines and landmasses unknown to Europe at the time, including what some believe to be the outlines of South America and Antarctica. Advocates for its authenticity point to the accuracy of Mediterranean and African details consistent with advanced medieval navigation, while skeptics argue it could be a later fabrication inserted into earlier records. There are also reports of strange annotations in Latin and Greek, with occasional symbols that resemble pre-Columbian glyphs, suggesting that information may have been gathered from sources far beyond Europe. Some theories propose that the map was brought to Rome by traders or explorers from the East, possibly via Byzantine intermediaries before the fall of Constantinople. The secrecy surrounding it may have been driven by both political and theological caution, as such a document could challenge established worldviews of the 15th century. For over 500 years, it has remained under controlled preservation in a sealed tube, removed only for occasional inspection by Vatican conservators. Whether it is an authentic window into forgotten voyages or a masterwork of medieval imagination, it remains locked away from public eyes. The journey of the map of the First World into Vatican possession is a matter of conjecture pieced together from indirect archival clues. A letter preserved in the Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana, dated to the late 1460s, records a conversation between a papal secretary and a Genoese navigator, who claimed to have seen a great chart from the time of the ancients in a private audience with the Pope. This was during the pontificate of Paul II, a period when maritime knowledge was becoming a valuable political asset. The navigator's notes, although incomplete, describe the parchment as showing a landmass beyond the Western Ocean, labeled with Latin words that translate roughly to shore of the blessed. Later, marginalia in Vatican shipping records from the early 16th century suggest the map was compared to reports from returning Portuguese and Spanish explorers, some of whom were startled by the similarities. There is also a cryptic entry from 1532 in the correspondence of a papal archivist, stating that the sacred chart must not leave the palace lest men think God's plan known before its time. This sentiment reflects the worldview of an era when theological interpretations of geography shaped political alliances and missionary ambitions. By the 18th century, the map had been transferred from the papal library to a more secure vault environment, rolled within a cedar tube lined with silk to protect it from humidity. Occasional restorations have been noted in internal records, including a repair in 1924 by a Vatican conservator trained in Florence. Theories about its origins range from ancient Roman maritime ventures to contact with lost civilizations, but no consensus exists. The map's guarded status continues to feed speculation, leaving its true story suspended between verifiable history and enduring mystery. The seventh and final treasure in this account is the Ring of the Fisherman reversed, an object steeped in both papal tradition and controversy. The Ring of the Fisherman, or Annulus Piscatoris, has long been worn by popes as a symbol of their authority, with each new pontiff receiving his own. Traditionally, the ring is destroyed upon a pope's death to prevent forgeries of papal decrees. However, archival fragments suggest that one particular ring, issued not for use but for secrecy, was never destroyed. References in an obscure 16th century inventory describe it as the seal of silence, bearing an inverted image of St. Peter casting his net, surrounded by an inscription written backward in Latin. The first reliable appearance of this ring in Vatican records dates to the pontificate of Pope Paul III, who presided over the Council of Trent and was deeply involved in consolidating church authority. A sealed memorandum from 1546, marked "For the Holy Father's eyes only," warns that the ring should be used only in matters where the light must be kept from the world. Its precise function is unknown, though some historians speculate it may have served to authenticate confidential orders, perhaps related to the suppression of certain books or movements during the Counter-Reformation. The design's reversal may have symbolized hidden authority or a deliberate inversion to distinguish it from official seals. Over the centuries, the ring appears sporadically in restricted inventories, always accompanied by strict instructions for its return to the vault. In the early 20th century, during the reforms of Pope Pius X, it was reportedly examined for preservation and placed in a secure reliquary within the deepest chamber of the vault. Its purpose, whether purely ceremonial or tied to decisions never meant for public knowledge, remains locked away with the ring itself. Take a breath. We've only scratched the surface. Subscribe to keep uncovering what's hidden. The history of the Ring of the Fisherman Reversed is traced through a series of tightly guarded documents that reveal its quiet passage between successive popes. One of the earliest surviving mentions beyond Paul III's reign appears in a confidential ledger from 1621 during the pontificate of Gregory XV. The entry describes the ring being removed from its reliquary for use in a matter touching the integrity of the faith and the safety of the throne of Peter. No further details are given, and the notation is followed by a deliberate gap in the record, suggesting that subsequent entries were either removed or never written. In the late 17th century, an internal Vatican memorandum ordered the ring placed under the joint custody of the Camerlengo and the prefect of the Apostolic Palace, both of whom were required to sign a sealed log whenever the object was accessed. This dual control system mirrors the safeguards applied to the most sensitive papal documents, reinforcing the belief that the ring was more than a symbolic artifact. A private diary kept by a 19th century Vatican archivist recounts overhearing a cardinal refer to the ring as the key that leaves no trace, though what this meant remains unknown. The last verifiable record of its handling comes from 1904, when it was reportedly inspected during an inventory, before being returned to its crystal case lined with red velvet. Since then, its presence has only been inferred from preservation notes, with no pope in the modern era publicly acknowledging it. Whether its function has been retired or continues in absolute secrecy is a matter of speculation. But its consistent concealment for nearly 5 centuries marks it as one of the most enigmatic artifacts the Vatican is believed to possess. While the 7 forbidden treasures form the heart of this account, the vault that houses them contains far more than these singular relics. Deep within the Apostolic Palace, Beneath layers of stone that date back to the early medieval fortifications, there are rooms whose very existence is omitted from architectural diagrams. Historical references to these spaces are scarce, often buried within unrelated documents. A papal building ledger from 1587, compiled under Pope Sixtus V, lists expenses for inner masonry works adjacent to the lower archive, a phrase that Vatican historians interpret as coded language for the reinforcement of hidden chambers. These rooms are said to have no direct stairway from public areas, accessible only through narrow passages guarded by doors with multiple locks, each requiring a different keyholder. Over the centuries, the vault's purpose has evolved. In its earliest form, it likely served as a treasury for precious metals, papal vestments, and liturgical vessels. As the Church's influence expanded and its archives grew, the vault became a repository for objects and documents considered too politically sensitive or theologically controversial for open display. A 17th century account by a visiting ambassador from the Duchy of Savoy describes being shown a small chamber wherein certain things are kept for the eyes of His Holiness alone. The ambassador's memoir, written decades later, does not specify what he saw, only that it was not the sort of thing that could be spoken of without grave consequence. In modern times, the physical preservation of such items has been enhanced with climate control, but the ancient stonework remains unchanged. Here, centuries overlap in silence, and the weight of history is felt in every shadowed arch and every sealed doorway. The Vatican's methods for safeguarding the vault have been shaped by centuries of political upheaval, invasions, and internal intrigue. In the early 16th century, during the sack of Rome in 1527, Swiss guards and loyal clerics are believed to have moved select relics and documents into hidden recesses of the vault to keep them from imperial troops. While much of the city suffered plunder and devastation, these inner chambers remained untouched, concealed behind barricaded passages known only to a handful of officials. Later, during the Napoleonic era, when French forces enter Rome in 1798, records indicate that Pope Pius VI ordered certain keys to be hidden outside the Vatican walls entirely, entrusted to monastic orders in distant regions. The principle of dispersing authority over access has persisted, with the vault's most restricted areas requiring the presence of multiple custodians, each holding a unique key or code. In the 20th century, this practice was adapted to modern security, adding reinforced steel doors, coded locks, and discrete surveillance systems. Yet, physical barriers are only part of the protection. Those allowed near the treasures sign lifetime oaths of secrecy, under penalty of excommunication, a tradition rooted in canon law and still in effect. The secrecy is not only to shield artifacts from theft or desecration, but also to control the narratives attached to them, ensuring that unverified or potentially disruptive interpretations do not reach the public. Visitors who have worked in peripheral areas speak of the heavy stillness that hangs in the air, the sense of being in a place where time is deliberately kept at bay. In such an environment, the treasures are not simply stored, they are entombed within the fabric of the Church's guarded history. Among the few recorded instances of outsiders nearing the most restricted sections of the vault, one of the most intriguing comes from the early 20th century. In 1929, During negotiations for the Lateran Treaty that established Vatican City as a sovereign state, a small group of Italian officials were reportedly given a tightly supervised tour of the Apostolic Palace. According to a memoir written decades later by one of the aides, the delegation was escorted past a series of guarded passages lined with heavy doors. At one point, their guide, a senior member of the Vatican's administrative staff, paused before an unmarked entrance and remarked that beyond it lay the history which cannot be told. Though the doors remained closed, the aide recalled a faint scent of incense mixed with a musty dryness, as if the air beyond had been sealed for years. He noted that the guards stationed there stood differently than those elsewhere in the palace, their attention unwavering, as though prepared for an order to deny entry even to the highest authorities. This moment left a deep impression on the aide, who later wrote that it was the first time he understood the depth of the Vatican's commitment to preserving not only its treasures, but also its secrets. The Lateran Treaty formalized the Church's independence and guaranteed its right to maintain archives and collections without outside interference, further strengthening the protection of the vault. From that point on, legal and diplomatic barriers stood alongside physical ones, ensuring that, even in times of political tension, the treasures within would remain under absolute papal control. To this day, no official account has ever confirmed what that aide may have sensed just beyond the threshold. The secrecy surrounding the vault has often fueled speculation, yet the Vatican has rarely addressed such rumors directly. One of the few public acknowledgments came indirectly in 1960, during preparations for the Second Vatican Council. Journalists from several countries were granted limited access to areas adjacent to the Apostolic Archives to document the Church's vast historical collections. While filming in a hallway near the older treasury rooms, a camera crew inadvertently captured a locked iron gate in the background. The gate, partially obscured by shadows, was later identified by some former Vatican staff as one of the secondary access points to the vault. Although the Vatican made no comment on the footage, it was quietly excluded from the final broadcast. Archival notes from that period indicate that certain items were moved deeper into storage during the council, possibly to ensure they remained untouched while large numbers of clergy and visitors were present in the city. This was a time of significant change, as Pope John XXIII sought to open the Church to dialogue with the modern world. Yet, even in that spirit of renewal, the most closely guarded relics and artifacts were kept far from public view. Scholars granted research privileges during the council reported encountering unexpected blank sections in archival inventories, with item numbers skipped entirely. Such omissions have long been interpreted as a deliberate method of masking the existence of objects that are never meant to be studied or displayed. The decision to keep these items hidden, even amid an era of reform, demonstrates the enduring belief that some aspects of history, whether for reasons of faith, politics, or preservation, must remain sealed within the confines of the vault, known only to the smallest circle of trusted custodians. The question of why certain treasures remain hidden has been debated quietly among historians, theologians, and archivists for generations. Officially, the Vatican maintains that the vault's contents are preserved to protect fragile artifacts from damage and to prevent the spread of false or misleading interpretations. Yet some records hint at deeper motives. A handwritten note from 1871, found in the personal papers of Cardinal Antonelli, then Secretary of State, states that there are things whose sight might wound the faith of the simple. This suggests that some objects may contradict widely accepted historical narratives or reveal episodes the Church prefers to address only within its own walls. Throughout history, institutions have withheld information to maintain authority, but in the case of the Vatican, such discretion carries a spiritual weight. A 16th century account from a papal librarian describes being ordered to rebind a manuscript so that certain pages could be sewn shut and inaccessible, all without altering the book's external appearance. Such measures indicate that concealment is as much a matter of presentation as of physical security. Even in modern times, the Church has exercised selective transparency, releasing some archival materials while keeping others entirely sealed. The criteria for what is locked away appear to involve a complex balance of theology, diplomacy, and the safeguarding of sacred heritage. To the outside observer, this secrecy can seem at odds with the Church's mission. Yet to those entrusted with the vault, it is framed as an act of stewardship. They see themselves not as gatekeepers of power, but as protectors of history's most delicate truths. Truths they believe the world is not yet ready to face. One of the clearest examples of selective secrecy occurred during the turbulent years of the Napoleonic occupation. In 1809, when French troops entered Rome and Pope Pius VII was taken prisoner, the Vatican faced the very real risk of its most valuable holdings being seized and transported to Paris. Surviving correspondence between senior curial officials reveals a coordinated effort to secure the vault. Certain items were moved in the dead of night through internal corridors to hidden alcoves beneath the Apostolic Palace, while others were quietly transferred to trusted monasteries outside the city. The most sensitive objects were reportedly placed in a section of the vault whose entrance was disguised behind a false wall. A French officer stationed in Rome later wrote in his memoirs that despite extensive searches, there remained a place we could not enter, a place whispered about by those who seemed to know more than they dared say. When the Pope returned to Rome in 1814, one of his first acts was to restore the vault to its original state, bringing back the treasures that had been hidden. Inventory records from that period show gaps where certain descriptions should be, replaced instead with the phrase, "as before." The absence of detail in these restored lists suggests a deliberate avoidance of naming what had been protected. This incident reinforced the policy of dispersing both knowledge and access, ensuring that no single person held all the information about the vault's full contents. From that point forward, the Church treated the safeguarding of these artifacts not only as a matter of preservation, but also as a symbol of resilience, proof that even under foreign occupation, its deepest secrets could endure untouched. The resilience of the vault was tested again during the upheavals of the Second World War. With Rome under threat and the possibility of German occupation looming, Pope Pius XII oversaw a series of contingency measures to protect the Church's most sensitive holdings. Vatican City's status as a neutral sovereign state offers some diplomatic shield, but it was no guarantee against intrusion. Internal memoranda from 1943, now stored in partially restricted sections of the Apostolic Archives, describe the relocation of certain relics and documents into subchambers beneath the vault, areas accessible only by narrow stone staircases, sealed with steel doors. These records indicate that the operation was carried out by a small group of clerics sworn to absolute secrecy. Rumors persisted among wartime diplomats that some of these hidden items included politically sensitive correspondence and religious artifacts whose exposure could have complicated the Vatican's delicate diplomatic position. A Swiss guard who later wrote privately of his service during those years recalled guarding a door within the palace that was not on any watch list, where the orders were simply to allow no one entry, no matter their title. Although the war ended without a direct assault on the Vatican, the episode deepened the institution's conviction that secrecy and survival were inseparable. In the years that followed, additional safeguards were introduced, blending modern technology with a centuries-old tradition of compartmentalized access. These measures ensured that even if one guardian were compromised, the integrity of the vault would remain intact. Today, the legacy of those wartime precautions is still evident in the layered defenses surrounding the treasures, each barrier a reminder of how close history came to breaching the Vatican's most sacred stronghold. By the mid-20th century, the vault had become more than a repository of relics and documents. It was now a carefully maintained symbol of continuity, embodying the Church's ability to endure through centuries of shifting powers. This symbolic role was subtly reinforced during the pontificate of John XXIII, a pope known for his openness and reforms. While he was preparing for the Second Vatican Council in the early 1960s, a small circle of trusted officials conducted a discreet review of the vault's most guarded items. Internal notes from that period, though sparse, suggest that certain artifacts were evaluated not for theological sensitivity alone, but for their potential cultural impact if ever made public. One memo preserved in a private collection, written by a Monsignor who participated in the review, reflects the tension between transparency and tradition. In it, he writes of objects whose existence could inspire faith in some and weaken it in others. This duality lies at the core of the vault's enduring secrecy. What is meant to protect faith may also challenge it. At the same time, new preservation techniques were implemented, including controlled humidity chambers and specialized archival casings, ensuring that centuries-old parchment and delicate metalwork could survive indefinitely. The integration of modern conservation methods alongside ancient stonework created an environment where time seemed suspended. For those few who entered, the vault offered a paradoxical sense of both immovable tradition and quiet adaptation, a place where history was not merely stored but actively guarded against the erosion of both decay and disclosure. Even amid a global atmosphere of change, the Vatican held firm to the belief that certain knowledge and artifacts were entrusted to it for safekeeping, not for the world's immediate gaze. The 1970s brought renewed curiosity about the Vatican's inner holdings, spurred in part by a wave of popular books and documentaries speculating on hidden archives and secret treasures. While much of this material was sensationalized, it nevertheless placed quiet pressure on the Church to address questions about what lay behind its most secure doors. Pope Paul VI, aware of this growing public fascination, authorized limited exhibitions of certain historical artifacts, but these carefully curated displays avoided any object tied to the vault's most sensitive inventory. Behind the scenes, however, the decade saw one of the most thorough preservation assessments in the vault's history. Conservation specialists from Italy, France, and Germany were discreetly invited to advise on the best methods to prevent deterioration of parchment, textiles, and precious metals stored in the sealed chambers. These consultations were carried out under strict non-disclosure agreements, and in some cases, the experts were not even told the origins of the items they examined. One restorer later wrote anonymously in a professional journal about handling a medieval map of lands known and unknown under such heavy supervision that she never saw the entire piece at once. This compartmentalization of information ensured that no single individual could leave with a complete picture of the vault's contents. During this period, a few security upgrades were made, including the installation of pressure-sensitive floors in certain corridors, designed to detect unapproved movement. Though such measures might seem excessive, they were consistent with the Vatican's long-standing policy of guarding its treasures not only against theft, but against the possibility of revelation. In this way, the 1970s became less a decade of exposure and more a reaffirmation of the principle that some history must remain untouched, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to see it. Let that one sink in. When you're ready for the next mystery, hit subscribe. In the 1980s, as global communication technology expanded and archival materials elsewhere became increasingly digitized, the Vatican faced a quiet dilemma. The Church's broader historical collections were slowly being cataloged for scholarly use, yet the vault's contents remained entirely absent from these efforts. Pope John Paul II, deeply aware of the symbolic and political weight of the Vatican's heritage, maintained the position that certain artifacts should never be copied or digitized, even for internal records. Internal correspondence from 1984 reveals discussions about whether partial photographs of certain fragile items could be taken solely for preservation purposes. Ultimately, most were rejected, with the reasoning that even a fragmentary image could fall into the wrong hands. Instead, the Vatican invested in enhanced environmental controls, installing systems to regulate temperature and light exposure with precision, ensuring that the relics and manuscripts could survive centuries longer without the need for invasive documentation. The decade also saw the introduction of more sophisticated access protocols. Key holders were now rotated at regular intervals, preventing any one custodian from developing long-term familiarity with all aspects of the vault. This approach was intended to reduce the risk of collusion or unauthorized disclosure. While the outside world became increasingly accustomed to open archives and rapid information sharing, the vault seemed to move in the opposite direction, its secrecy deepening with every technological advance. This was not an oversight, but a deliberate act of preservation of both material and mystery. For those few permitted entry, the experience remained unchanged, passing from the bustling modernity of the Apostolic Palace into a realm where centuries-old silence absorbed the hum of contemporary life, leaving only the weight of history and the awareness of how little of it could ever be told. By the early 1990s, whispers about the vault began to blend with emerging conspiracy theories circulating on new internet forums. Amateur historians, religious commentators, and speculative writers claimed that within those sealed chambers lay proof of alternate histories, lost gospels, or even pre-Christian relics that could challenge the Church's official narrative. While much of this was unfounded, the Vatican quietly noted the growing public fixation. Internally, the response was not to open the vault, but to further restrict internal knowledge of its inventory. A 1990 992 directive from the Secretariat of State ordered that certain older catalogs, even those incomplete or coded, be removed from general archival access and stored exclusively in the same climate-controlled environment as the artifacts themselves. This meant that, in some cases, knowledge of an item's existence was as closely guarded as the object. Accounts from former curio staff suggest that the vault was entered even less frequently during this period, with maintenance and inspections staggered to limit exposure. Interestingly, the decade also brought increased collaboration with a select number of scientific experts, particularly in metallurgy, manuscript preservation, and textile conservation, but under conditions of absolute compartmentalization. These specialists often worked from fragments, photographs of details, or even life-sized replicas, never handling the original in its entirety. This period reinforced the Vatican's philosophy that access and understanding were not necessarily the same thing. An object could be preserved, studied in part, yet never fully revealed. For the small circle who knew the vault's true scale, this approach was not merely about secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was about control over the narrative of history itself, a narrative they believed could be destabilized if too much was shown too quickly. The turn of the millennium brought subtle but significant changes to how the vault was secured. In the early 2000s, advances in biometric technology began to replace some of the older mechanical safeguards, though not entirely. Fingerprint scanners and retinal recognition systems were installed at certain checkpoints, but these were paired with a traditional multi-key system, ensuring that no technological failure could grant unauthorized entry. According to a Vatican engineer who later spoke anonymously, these modern upgrades were deliberately understated, concealed within existing stone archways and wooden door frames, so as not to disrupt the centuries-old aesthetic of the chambers. This blending of old and new reflected the Church's commitment to tradition while acknowledging the realities of contemporary security threats. The early years of this century also saw renewed international interest in cultural property, with global conventions and agreements urging transparency in heritage holdings. While the Vatican participated in such discussions, it drew a firm line around the vault's contents, classifying them as non-loanable and non-exhibitable under any circumstance. At the same time, an internal preservation review noted that some manuscripts and textiles required rotation into deeper storage to prevent overexposure, even to the minimal artificial light allowed inside. This practice of shifting locations within the vault added another layer of confusion for anyone attempting to map its contents. The modernization efforts did not change the underlying truth. Entry remained the privilege of an exceedingly small number of individuals, and even they might see only a fraction of what was hidden there. In an age when much of the world's knowledge was being digitized and made available in seconds, the vault stood as a deliberate counterpoint, its silence and shadows growing all the more striking against the noise of the information age. In 2005, the death of Pope John Paul II and the election of Pope Benedict XVI brought a brief moment when internal procedures around the vault were quietly reassessed. Each new pope inherits ultimate authority over its contents, but this transition also serves as a rare opportunity for the pontiff to be privately briefed on what is stored there. While these briefings are undocumented in official records, accounts from those familiar with Vatican protocol suggest they can last several hours and involve presentations from the prefect of the Apostolic Archives, the head of the Swiss Guard, and selected curators. During Benedict XVI's early pontificate, a decision was made to review certain conservation needs more aggressively, particularly for objects composed of organic materials like papyrus, ancient leather, and rare woods. This led to a temporary influx of conservation specialists working under heightened restrictions. These experts were escorted at all times and often worked in partial darkness to limit light damage. Some later hinted, in professional publications, at handling items whose craftsmanship predated known historical timelines for such techniques. Whether these impressions were accurate or the result of encountering unfamiliar styles remains unknown, but they fueled further outside speculation. The Vatican neither confirmed nor denied the nature of these objects, maintaining its long-standing position that preservation, not public disclosure, is the vault's primary mission. The change in papal leadership also reinforced another long-standing principle. The knowledge of the vault's complete inventory is passed directly from one pope to the next, bypassing even the highest-ranking cardinals. This unbroken chain of personal papal custody has ensured that, for centuries, ultimate control over the Church's most guarded treasures remains in the hands of a single living successor to St. Peter. By the early 2010s, public fascination with the Vatican's hidden holdings had intensified, spurred on by best-selling novels, high-profile documentaries, and speculative online communities. While many of these accounts exaggerated or invented details, the increased attention did not go unnoticed inside the Apostolic Palace. Pope Benedict XVI's resignation in 2013 and the election of Pope Francis created another moment of transition, though the new pontiff's approach to transparency sparked cautious discussion among curial officials. Francis was more open to releasing archival materials on historical episodes, particularly those related to 20th century diplomacy. Yet the vault remained firmly off-limits. During his first year, the Vatican quietly undertook a structural assessment of the sublevels where the vault lies, inspecting for seismic vulnerabilities and potential water intrusion. These inspections, carried out by a small engineering team, reveal the remarkable resilience of the centuries-old construction. The engineers were reportedly struck by how certain passages appear to have been reinforced multiple times across different eras, with masonry from the Renaissance interlaced with Baroque stonework and, in some places, modern steel. This layering told its own story, a history of continuous defense and adaptation. At the same time, the vault's environmental controls were upgraded to match the highest international conservation standards, allowing for more precise regulation of humidity and air purity. Despite the public's growing appetite for disclosure, these improvements were implemented without any suggestion that the treasures within would be displayed. In fact, the very act of reinforcing and refining the vault's preservation systems signaled the opposite, that the Vatican intended its most sensitive holdings to remain secured for generations to come, regardless of cultural or political pressure to unveil them. In 2015, an unusual but little publicized incident underscored just how tightly the vault was controlled. According to accounts later shared in closed academic circles, a visiting head of state was granted a private tour of select Vatican collections as part of a diplomatic visit. The itinerary included the Sistine Chapel, the Apostolic Archives, and several treasury rooms. But when the delegation inquired half in jest about seeing the Pope's legendary vault, the request was politely deflected. The explanation offered was that the vault was undergoing structural maintenance, though no such work was evident elsewhere in the palace. Those familiar with Vatican protocol recognize this as a standard response meant to shut down further questions without creating offense. Around the same time, conservation teams were reportedly examining several ancient reliquaries under extremely low-light conditions, suggesting that the vault's activities had not been interrupted in the slightest. That year also saw the Vatican adopt even more discreet security measures. The installation of silent, motion-triggered alarms embedded within the flooring of certain corridors. These systems, invisible to the casual observer, were designed to alert Swiss Guard control rooms instantly if anyone crossed a protected threshold without clearance. This invisible perimeter reinforced an already formidable series of physical and procedural safeguards. In a world increasingly obsessed with access and revelation, the vault's refusal to yield to public curiosity only deepened its mystique. For the Vatican, the vault was not a tourist attraction to be unveiled for applause, but a living trust, a carefully maintained inheritance that bound together centuries of faith, power, and memory. Its true significance, known to only a few, was measured not in the value of the gold or jewels it might contain, but in the weight of the stories that could never be told aloud. By 2017, the Vatican was navigating a global climate of shifting alliances, renewed debates over cultural restitution, and increasing calls for transparency in the stewardship of historical treasures. Across Europe, museums and national archives were returning artifacts to their countries of origin, but the Apostolic Palace maintained its position that the vault's holdings were not part of any such negotiations. Privately, Vatican officials argued that many of the items in question had been entrusted to the Church centuries ago under conditions of spiritual guardianship, not as political spoils or property. That year, a confidential symposium was convened in Rome, bringing together a handful of historians, theologians, and archivists who were given indirect access to vault-related topics. Rather than showing the treasures themselves, curators presented high-resolution images of select details, an illuminated letter here, a fragment of gold filigree there, without identifying the full objects. Attendees were encouraged to discuss the theological symbolism and historical context, but any speculation about their current storage was met with polite redirection. It was a demonstration of the Vatican's preferred balance between scholarship and secrecy, revealing enough to inspire awe without granting possession of the whole truth. Behind the scenes, engineers continued to refine the vault's infrastructure, quietly replacing aging ventilation ducts and reinforcing the subterranean walls with specialized sealants to guard against moisture intrusion. These improvements ensure the artifacts would remain stable for centuries, even in the event of natural disaster. To those entrusted with its care, the vault was more than an archive. It was a responsibility handed down in a chain unbroken since the Renaissance, where each custodian understood that their duty was as much about deciding what the world should never see as it was about preserving what it might one day be allowed to know. In 2019, the Vatican quietly marked the centenary of the formal establishment of its apostolic archives, an event celebrated publicly with exhibitions and academic conferences. Yet none of these festivities touched upon the vault, whose existence remained conspicuously absent from speeches and publications. While historians were granted access to previously restricted 20th century diplomatic files, the deeper chambers continued their silent vigil. That same year, a new round of internal reviews was ordered, focusing on the physical condition of some of the oldest manuscripts believed to be stored in the vault. Expert conservators, flown in under strict confidentiality agreements, were tasked with examining binding materials, parchment integrity, and ink stability. They worked in controlled shifts, each specialist allowed to see only the portion of a manuscript directly relevant to their expertise. This method preserved the compartmentalization that had long been a hallmark of vault protocol. According to a private letter later circulated among preservationists, one expert was struck by the vividness of pigments on a page that seemed to predate any known medieval illumination techniques. Whether this was the result of exceptional preservation, lost craftsmanship, or something else entirely, remained an unanswered question. Outside the Vatican walls, speculation about the vault reached new intensity, amplified by social media and popular fiction. But for the men and women who moved quietly through its stone corridors, the mission remained unchanged: protect, preserve, and decide generation by generation if and when the outside world should be allowed even the briefest glimpse. To them, the vault's secrecy was not a denial of history, but a careful curation of it, ensuring that its treasures survived not only the passage of time, but also the storms of public interpretation. The year 2020 brought unexpected challenges, as the global pandemic closed museums, libraries, and archives around the world. The Vatican, while affected in its public functions, maintained the vault's operations without interruption. Reduced staff presence meant even fewer individuals were on site, but those assigned to security and preservation worked in alternating shifts to ensure constant protection. Some preservation projects that required outside specialists were postponed, but environmental controls within the vault were monitored continuously, with remote systems sending real-time data to a secure control room elsewhere in the Apostolic Palace. During this period of global isolation, the vault's very inaccessibility seemed to heighten its mystique. Public attention, already drawn to mysteries and conspiracy theories during the long months of lockdown, frequently turned toward the idea of what might be hidden in such an impenetrable place. A handful of speculative articles and videos claimed that the Vatican could be harboring pandemic-related historical records, citing centuries-old accounts of plagues and religious responses. Official channels dismissed these as unfounded, yet the fact that no one could disprove them without opening the vault kept the stories alive. Internally, however, the Church viewed this time as a reminder of why certain treasures and documents were kept under such extraordinary control. Because in moments of uncertainty, the weight of information could be as destabilizing as the absence of it. When restrictions eventually eased, work inside the vault resumed at full capacity, but the episode reaffirmed an enduring truth. No matter how much the outside world changes, the vault's function remains constant, a silent counterpoint to the shifting rhythms of history beyond its sealed doors. In 2021, as the Vatican cautiously reopened to scholars and visitors, the vault remained untouched by the renewed flow of people into its surrounding halls. That year, a discreet inspection was carried out by a small team of engineers and conservators tasked with assessing the long-term stability of the subterranean structure. Using non-invasive imaging technology, they mapped the layers of stone, mortar, and metal reinforcements without disturbing a single artifact. Their scans revealed a complex network of chambers, some of which had no recorded mention in existing architectural plans. Whether these spaces were storage extensions, sealed passageways, or remnants of earlier construction phases was not disclosed beyond a small circle of senior officials. In a rare move, the Vatican authorized the replacement of certain aging mechanical locks with newly designed models that incorporated both precision engineering and manual craftsmanship, ensuring that even if electronic systems failed, the vault could remain secure. This combination of traditional and modern methods echoed the Church's centuries-old philosophy, adapting without abandoning what has endured. At the same time, an internal memorandum reaffirmed that the vault's contents were to remain inaccessible to all but the most essential custodians, with no exceptions for visiting dignitaries or external researchers. Outside its walls, the year brought renewed speculation, fueled by leaked photographs of ornate, unidentified chests said to be housed somewhere within Vatican property. Whether these images had any real connection to the vault was left unanswered, but their appearance once again reminded the public that the true inventory of the Pope's most guarded treasury remained known only to a few, each bound by oaths of secrecy that stretched back generations. A pause is good, but the secrets don't stop here. Subscribe and stay close. By 2022, advances in archival science and artifact preservation were making headlines around the world, with institutions unveiling groundbreaking methods to restore faded manuscripts, stabilize ancient pigments, and even reverse certain forms of decay. The Vatican quietly incorporated some of these techniques into its broader conservation programs. But for the vault's contents, implementation was handled with extreme caution. Only a select number of specialists, chosen for both their technical expertise and their ability to work under intense confidentiality, were brought in to apply these methods to a few high-priority items. These projects were carried out entirely within the vault's inner chambers, never removing the artifacts from their controlled environment. According to one conservation expert who later spoke anonymously, the experience was unlike any other in their career, not because of the work itself, but because of the constant presence of security personnel and the careful choreography of movement within the space. Each item was approached as though it were both priceless and irreplaceable, with every step documented in secure ledgers stored on site. Outside the Vatican, global conversations about transparency and cultural heritage continue to grow louder, with activists and scholars pressing institutions to reveal hidden collections. Yet the Vatican's position on the vault remained unshaken. It was not a matter of denying the world access to beauty or knowledge, officials argued, but of preserving certain truths until the moment they could be received in the right spirit. That stance, as ever, was met with skepticism by some and deep respect by others. Within the quiet stone chambers, time seemed to move differently, and the treasures rested as they had for centuries, untouched by passing fashions, guarded by walls meant to last longer than the questions outside. In 2023, the Vatican's focus on the vault turned toward reinforcing its defense against emerging digital threats. While the structure itself was impervious to online intrusion, the systems that monitored temperature, humidity, and security alerts relied on discretely networked components. A specialized team was tasked with isolating these systems from any external connectivity, ensuring they could not be accessed remotely under any circumstance. This move reflected an understanding that in the modern era, breaches need not come through a physical doorway. Alongside these technical safeguards Routine preservation checks continued, with particular attention given to items composed of fragile organic materials, vellum manuscripts, relic cases lined with ancient textiles, and early bindings whose leather had survived hundreds of years in perfect darkness. Reports from these inspections, never made public, were stored in secured cabinets inside the vault itself rather than in any digital format. Meanwhile, outside the Vatican walls, speculative claims about the vault surged again, fueled by a wave of viral videos and podcasts suggesting it might contain objects of extraterrestrial origin or records of pre-biblical civilizations. Officials neither confirmed nor addressed such claims, maintaining a stance of measured silence that only seemed to intensify the intrigue. Those who worked closest to the vault understood that its significance did not depend on such sensational theories. The true value lay in the continuity of its guardianship, a chain of careful hands stretching back through centuries, each generation quietly ensuring that the world's most dangerous or transformative artifacts remain sealed away, waiting for a time that might never come. By 2024, the Vatican's guardianship of the vault had become a symbol within certain ecclesiastical circles, a reminder of the Church's ability to withstand the pressures of an ever faster, ever more revealing world. That year, a quiet internal anniversary was marked. 500 years since the vault's earliest recorded construction phase during the papacy of Leo X. No public acknowledgement was made, but within the Apostolic Palace, a small gathering of senior curators, archivists, and Swiss Guard officers commemorated the milestone in a private chapel. A prayer was offered for the safekeeping of the treasures, followed by a review of the vault's condition and an affirmation of its protocols. Unconfirmed accounts from those present suggest that the Pope himself visited the vault that week, accompanied by only 2 attendants, and spent several hours in its innermost chamber. The purpose of his visit remains unknown, but whispers within the curia hinted at the inspection of an object rarely viewed even by pontiffs. Meanwhile, technological upgrades continued at a slow, deliberate pace. A new layer of passive seismic dampening was installed beneath certain sections of the subfloor, a precaution against the growing risk of earthquakes in the Mediterranean region. All of this was conducted without altering the vault's historic fabric, preserving the illusion that it had remained unchanged for centuries. Outside, the public fascination endured, with journalists and amateur historians proposing elaborate theories about what might justify such secrecy. But within the walls, the logic was clear. The vault was not about spectacle. It was a trust, a guardianship of history's most fragile, potent, and potentially disruptive relics, watched over with the same gravity today as when the first stone was laid half a millennium ago. In 2025, the Vatican authorized a rare audit of its most sensitive archival and treasury holdings, an initiative that extended, in part, to the vault. This was not an inventory in the conventional sense. Rather, it was a discreet verification that certain key items remained in their designated locations and in their expected condition. The team assigned to this task was smaller than any other in living memory. 3 individuals with complementary expertise in conservation, archival cataloging, and high-security oversight. Each was escorted by Swiss Guard officers and allowed inside only during tightly scheduled windows, ensuring no overlap in their work. Their observations were recorded in sealed, handwritten ledgers, one copy of which was placed in the vault itself, the other in a secured chamber within the Apostolic Palace. While no details of the objects inspected were disclosed, the process reaffirmed the Church's insistence on redundancy in record-keeping and its preference for physical documentation over digital files. Outside the Vatican, discussions about transparency and cultural heritage reached new intensity, with prominent figures in academia calling for institutions to share even partial lists of their hidden holdings. The Vatican's response was as measured as ever. Such treasures, it stated, were held in perpetuity for the good of the Church and humanity, not for public curiosity. Within the stone confines of the vault, the audit passed quietly, leaving the arrangement of relics, manuscripts, and artifacts exactly as they had been before, untouched by the shifting arguments beyond its sealed doors. For those entrusted with its keys, the act of confirming and maintaining the vault's order was more than procedural. It was a renewal of the same solemn vow their predecessors had upheld for centuries, one that would bind their successors long after their own service ended. That same year, whispers began to circulate within certain scholarly and diplomatic circles that the Vatican had recently re-examined one of its most enigmatic holdings, a relic whose provenance bridged the worlds of archaeology, theology, and legend. While no official acknowledgement was made, the timing of an unusually long private session between the Pope and the prefect of the Apostolic Archives fueled speculation. Some claimed the item in question was linked to early Christian communities in the Eastern Mediterranean, preserved in a state so pristine that modern experts struggle to explain its survival. Inside the vault, such an inspection would have been carried out under extraordinary conditions, minimal lighting, layers of protective coverings, and the presence of both conservators and security personnel standing silently in attendance. Outside of Vatican walls, the global fascination with this hidden world persisted, intensified by an era where nearly everything else could be photographed, leaked, or streamed in seconds. Yet the vault remained immune to such intrusions, its stone corridors and iron-banded doors existing far beyond the reach of casual documentation. To the custodians, secrecy was not a relic of the past, but an active safeguard for the present. Even if the nature of the examined object had been extraordinary, it would have been returned to its resting place without ceremony, sealed away once more in the climate-controlled dark. For those who bore the responsibility of its protection, the decision not to reveal it was an act of stewardship, not concealment, a belief that the most powerful truths often demand the longest silence before the world is ready to receive them. In early 2026, a subtle shift occurred in the Vatican's approach to the vault's physical protection. While the existing Swiss Guard presence remained constant, a new layer of internal monitoring was introduced. An intricate network of vibration sensors embedded directly into the stone walls and flooring. These devices, designed to detect even the faintest disturbance, were calibrated to differentiate between harmless environmental tremors and any deliberate attempt to breach the structure. The installation took months and was conducted exclusively at night, with access to the work areas heavily restricted. Officially, this was described as part of ongoing structural health monitoring, but those familiar with the operation understood that it represented a quiet strengthening of the vault's defenses. Meanwhile, inside the chamber, regular conservation cycles continued without interruption. Several relics, reportedly dating back to the early centuries of the Church, underwent controlled cleaning procedures always performed on site and never allowing the items to leave the vault's climate-controlled environment. Outside, public discourse on the Vatican's hidden treasures entered a new phase, blending traditional intrigue with digital age speculation. Entire communities formed online, attempting to crowdsource theories about the vault's contents using scraps of historical records, papal travel logs, and obscure ecclesiastical references. None of this activity altered the Vatican's stance. The custodians maintained their quiet rhythm, guided by the same principle that had endured for centuries: that stewardship meant not only preserving what was entrusted to them, but also guarding the timing of its revelation. In this way, the vault continued to resist the age of instant access, remaining a rare place in the modern world where the deepest secrets still waited in darkness, unhurried and untouched. By mid-2026, the Vatican faced renewed pressure from international coalitions, advocating for the return of culturally significant artifacts to their places of origin. While these movements primarily targeted national museums and colonial-era collections, whispers inevitably reached the subject of the Pope's vault. Official responses were minimal, stating only that the Church's role as custodian was rooted in agreements that transcended political borders and modern restitution frameworks. Behind closed doors, senior Vatican officials convened to reaffirm the legal and spiritual foundations of their claim over the vault's contents. According to internal reports never released to the public, a legal review was conducted, tracing the chain of possession for several high-profile relics back through centuries of papal decrees, royal gifts, and ecclesiastical treaties. Many of these items, the review concluded, had no clear singular origin to which they could be returned, having passed through multiple realms and dynasties before finding their way to Rome. While the findings were intended solely for internal use, they further solidified the Vatican's conviction that the vault's treasures were best preserved under their guardianship. During this same period, a minor structural reinforcement was completed along one of the oldest subterranean corridors, replacing a section of deteriorating masonry with new stone carefully matched to the original. The work was carried out in total silence, far from public notice, much like the centuries of maintenance that had preceded it. In the eyes of those who oversaw the project, this was simply another act of stewardship, quiet, deliberate, and free from the noise of public debate, ensuring that the treasures within would remain undisturbed, no matter how loudly the outside world called for their unveiling. Late in 2026, the Vatican approved a specialized preservation initiative focusing on several ancient manuscripts believed to be among the most fragile items in the vault. These texts, some written on papyrus and others on early parchment, were so delicate that even minimal exposure to light could accelerate their deterioration. A small team of conservators, each vetted through months of security and ethical screenings, was granted access to examine them under extremely low illumination, using fiber optic tools that projected pinpoint beams. The process was methodical and slow, sometimes requiring hours to inspect just a single page. In some cases, microscopic imaging revealed details invisible to the naked eye, faint annotations, corrections by the original scribe, and pigments still vibrant despite the centuries. None of these findings left the vault in digital form. Instead, they were recorded in handwritten notes that would be locked away alongside the artifacts themselves. Outside, rumors about these manuscripts gained traction after a European historian claimed in an interview that the Vatican was in possession of early Christian writings predating the canonical Gospels. The claim was met with silence from church representatives, allowing speculation to flourish. Inside, however, the custodians moved without haste, guided by the belief that some knowledge must be preserved before it can ever be revealed. For them, this was not secrecy for its own sake, but a deliberate, patient protection of heritage, trusting that the vault's guardianship would outlast the fleeting noise of public curiosity. In early 2027, a scheduled review of the vault's environmental systems was undertaken, focusing on the delicate balance of temperature, humidity, and air purity that kept its contents stable. Over the decades, the Vatican had developed a custom climate control network that relied less on standard HVAC systems and more on passive regulation enhanced by discrete mechanical assistance. This year's review included replacing certain aging filtration units with new models designed to remove microscopic particulates while introducing no chemical residues that could harm ancient materials. The work was carried out under close supervision, with each component tested before installation. During the inspection, technicians also checked the vault's network of sealed cases, massive, reinforced containers holding items so sensitive they were never handled outside of their enclosures. Each case was opened briefly to ensure no internal condensation had formed, then resealed under the same strict protocols that had been in place for decades. Meanwhile, outside the Vatican, speculative articles began circulating online, suggesting that the vault's environmental systems were not only for preservation, but also for containing hazardous materials. Some theories claimed that relics inside could emit toxins or even radioactive traces. Official Vatican sources dismissed these ideas, reiterating that all preservation measures were designed purely to protect fragile artifacts from natural decay. Inside, however, those who worked in the vault knew that its systems served a dual role, preserving history while ensuring that nothing, however ancient or unknown, could threaten the world beyond its doors. In their view, such measures were not born of secrecy, but of the same responsibility that had guided the vault's keepers for centuries. By mid-2027, the Vatican initiated a discreet security exercise within the vault to test its readiness against potential breaches. This was not a publicized drill, but a tightly controlled operation known only to a handful of senior officials and the most trusted members of the Swiss Guard. The exercise simulated various scenarios, from forced entry attempts to environmental emergencies, each one monitored by hidden sensors and recorded in secure logs. No real artifacts were moved, but stand-ins of similar weight and dimensions were used to test handling protocols under time constraints. The results revealed minor inefficiencies, which were immediately addressed, adjusting patrol patterns, refining access authorization sequences, and ensuring redundancies in every layer of the security process. The drill also reaffirmed a core truth that had guided the vault for centuries. No single person could ever access its most sensitive chambers without multiple independent clearances. Outside the Vatican, rumors of heightened security sparked curiosity, with some claiming that the Church was expecting an attempt to steal a particularly valuable relic. Others speculated about the arrival of a newly discovered treasure requiring urgent protection. The Vatican issued no comment, leaving the propolis stories to fade or evolve on their own. Inside, the custodians returned to their daily routines, aware that while the world outside could spin with conjecture, the real work was measured, quiet, and endlessly repetitive. This was the essence of the vault's endurance, a steady rhythm of vigilance, as constant and unyielding as the stone walls themselves. In late 2027, a confidential cultural exchange took place between the Vatican and a small group of invited scholars from select universities. While these visits typically involved access only to publicly available archives, this occasion included a private audience in which the Pope spoke broadly about the Church's role in preserving humanity's shared heritage. Nowhere in the discussion was the vault mentioned by name, yet those who understood Vatican protocol recognized the subtle references to its existence. Later, a few attendees hinted, without offering proof, that they had been shown rare items ordinarily never removed from deep storage. If true, such a gesture would have been unprecedented in modern times and would have taken place under extreme supervision, likely in a controlled chamber outside the vault itself. Back within the vault's stone corridors, the keepers remained unchanged in their duties. Climate readings were logged, protective seals inspected, and illumination levels kept to the bare minimum necessary for safe navigation. Meanwhile, outside its walls, speculation grew as fragments of the scholars' accounts reached the press. Headlines suggested that the Vatican might be preparing to reveal certain treasures to the world, perhaps as part of a broader gesture toward cultural diplomacy. The Church issued no confirmation, and the excitement eventually subsided into the same background murmur that had followed the vault for generations. To its guardians, the real story was not about disclosure or secrecy. It was about stewardship. Whether the world knew or guessed what lay inside was irrelevant. What mattered was that the treasures, entrusted through centuries of faith and history, remained unbroken in the care of those sworn to protect them. Rest your mind, you've earned it. But when the next veil lifts, be here. Subscribe. In early 2028, the Vatican authorized a discreet maintenance project focused on the vault's oldest entryway, a massive reinforced door whose origins dated back to the 16th century. While the primary entrance used today is a more modern and fortified design, this ancient door remained in place as part of the original architecture, sealed and long unused. The work involved carefully removing surface corrosion from its wrought iron bands and replacing a few weathered stone blocks in the surrounding arch. Even though the door no longer functioned as an access point, its preservation was considered essential to maintaining the vault's historical integrity. The project was carried out entirely within the dim, temperature-stable corridors, with artisans working by lamplight and under constant observation. During the restoration, several previously hidden mason's marks were discovered on the interior stonework symbols and initials that suggested the identities of those who first built the structure centuries ago. These marks were recorded in secure ledgers but never released publicly, adding another quiet layer to the vault's mystery. Outside the Vatican, news of the repair was never officially announced, though a single photograph of craftsmen near a barred stone archway leaked to a small European journal. The image, stripped of any identifying details, prompted a flurry of online speculation about secret entrances and lost tunnels beneath the Apostolic Palace. Within the Vatican itself, the work was completed without fanfare, and the old door was once again left in silence, a relic of an earlier era guarding a threshold that no one crossed anymore. Yet for the keepers of the vault, tending to it was as important as safeguarding the treasures inside, a reminder that even the barriers themselves were part of the history they were sworn to protect. By mid-2028, a rare intersection between faith and science quietly unfolded within the Vatican's most secure spaces, A small, invitation-only symposium was convened for experts in materials analysis, paleography, and historical theology. While the official program listed the gathering as a discussion on preservation ethics, those in attendance later hinted that certain case studies presented may have been drawn from the vault's holdings. The descriptions delivered without specific names or dates spoke of artifacts whose construction techniques defied easy classification, blending ancient craftsmanship with methods seemingly ahead of their time. To protect confidentiality, all visual references were replaced with schematic diagrams, and the discussions took place in a room with no recording devices, cameras, or windows. Participants were escorted in and out along predetermined routes, ensuring that no one strayed near restricted areas. Outside the Vatican, the event went unnoticed, except for a brief mention in an academic newsletter, which sparked only mild curiosity in specialist circles. Yet for those within the curia, the symposium marked an important test, a way to gauge how modern scholarship could engage with extraordinary relics without exposing them directly. Inside the vault, the objects themselves remained untouched, resting as they had for centuries in darkness and controlled air. To the custodians, this was proof that knowledge could be shared in measured ways, offering glimpses without ever fully opening the door. The balance between secrecy and scholarship had always been fragile, but in this instance, it held, allowing the treasures to remain unseen while still quietly influencing the currents of historical thought far beyond the Vatican's walls. In late 2028, the Vatican undertook a subtle yet significant enhancement to the vault's internal layout. Over the centuries, the placement of certain artifacts had followed a meticulous order, dictated by preservation needs and security considerations. However, as some objects required more precise environmental control than their current locations could provide, a reorganization was deemed necessary. The operation took place over several weeks, conducted entirely by hand to avoid vibrations that might damage delicate items. Each relocation was overseen by both a conservator and a security officer, with every movement logged in two separate ledgers, one stored in the vault and the other in a sealed archive elsewhere in the Apostolic Palace. No object left the vault during this process. Instead, the chambers were subtly rebalanced to optimize airflow, temperature, and humidity for the most fragile relics. A few cases were repositioned deeper within the complex, closer to the most stable microclimates, while sturdier items were moved nearer to the outer corridors. From the outside, there was no sign that anything had changed. Yet for those who maintained the vault, this reordering was one of the most delicate undertakings in decades. The work was accompanied by additional sealing of cracks in older masonry to prevent moisture ingress, ensuring the vault's integrity for decades to come. While the wider world speculated endlessly about hidden discoveries, the reality was quieter but no less important. An act of preservation carried out with the same deliberate care that had defined the vault's guardianship for generations. In the end, the treasures remained unseen, their protection strengthened, their silence unbroken. By early 2029, the Vatican authorized a specialized inspection of the vault's deepest structural foundations, some of which predated the Renaissance and may have been adapted from even earlier Roman-era masonry. This examination was prompted by a combination of routine maintenance schedules and subtle seismic activity recorded in the region the previous year. Engineers and preservation architects, all sworn to secrecy, descended into the lowest levels with portable instruments capable of mapping hidden voids and detecting hairline fractures within the stone. The work revealed sections where ancient mortar had weakened, prompting immediate reinforcement with carefully matched materials. In one corner of the foundation, a sealed alcove was discovered, though it contained nothing more than rubble and sediment, likely the remnants of a construction phase abandoned centuries earlier. The team noted the alcove in their private report but refrained from further excavation, respecting the directive that no unnecessary disturbance should be made to the vault's original design. Throughout the project, the Swiss Guard maintained a constant presence, ensuring no unauthorized personnel could approach. Outside the Vatican, the inspection went entirely unnoticed, just one more invisible chapter in the ongoing stewardship of a structure built to outlast its keepers. For those who oversaw the work, the operation was a reminder of the vault's dual nature, both a physical stronghold and a symbolic guardian of trust. Every stone, every sealed passage was part of a legacy, stretching back through centuries of faith and power. Its endurance measured not by what the world saw, but by what it would never be permitted to see. In mid-2029, a small circle within the Vatican was granted permission to conduct a textual analysis of certain sealed manuscripts believed to date from the earliest centuries of Christianity. These documents had not been opened in decades, their bindings too fragile for casual handling. The team consisted of 2 paleographers, a preservation specialist, and a theological advisor, all working under strict observation. Each manuscript was placed on a specially designed cradle to prevent strain on its spine, and pages were turned only with soft, non-abrasive tools. The air around the workspace was filtered and kept at a slightly higher humidity to minimize static, which could damage brittle fibers. As the scholars examined the fading ink, they documented not only the content, but also marginal notes, ink variations, and script changes that hinted at multiple contributors across generations. One fragment appeared to contain an unfamiliar liturgical formula, though without full context, it could not be conclusively identified. The findings, like all work in the vault, were written by hand in duplicate and secured immediately afterward. Outside the Vatican, nothing of this session was known, and the manuscripts were returned to their sealed cases within hours. To those present, the experience was less about discovery and more about continuity, another careful step in a long chain of custodianship. They understood that what they had read might not see public light for decades, perhaps centuries. Yet preserving its existence in the present was an act as significant as revealing it to the world. Late in 2029, the Vatican initiated a rare audit of the vault's inventory, an exhaustive process intended to verify the physical presence, condition, and documentation of every item under its care. This undertaking, carried out only once every few decades, required months of preparation. Access was granted to a small, rotating team of archivists and security officers, each working in pairs to ensure accuracy and accountability. Every artifact, from monumental relics to the smallest fragments, was cross-checked against centuries-old ledgers and more recent preservation records. The process was painstaking, with some entries requiring translation from archaic Latin to confirm their details. For certain treasures whose descriptions had faded over time, physical inspection brought to light subtle features, tiny inscriptions, tooling marks, or traces of pigment that had not been noted in modern records. In a few cases, updated condition reports prompted minor adjustments to storage conditions, such as shifting items to areas with more stable temperature gradients. Throughout the audit, nothing was removed from the vault. The work was entirely internal and shielded from outside view. Beyond the walls of the Apostolic Palace, the world remained unaware that such a massive accounting was taking place, though the keepers of the vault considered it among the most important duties they could perform. For them, the audit was not simply an administrative task, but a reaffirmation of trust, proof that every entrusted treasure remained intact, protected, and accounted for, just as it had been for generations. In early 2030, the Vatican authorized a controlled lighting study within select areas of the vault to ensure that existing illumination methods posed no risk to the preservation of its most delicate artifacts. For decades, the chambers had relied on extremely low-intensity lamps, often shielded or filtered to remove harmful wavelengths. However, advancements in lighting technology promised even safer alternatives, prompting the custodians to test new systems. Specialists installed temporary fixtures, equipped with fiber optic delivery and adjustable spectral filters, allowing precise control over brightness and heat emission. These lights were directed only at designated display or work areas and were switched off immediately when not in use. The study also measured subtle temperature fluctuations caused by prolonged exposure, ensuring that even the smallest changes would not harm pigments, inks, or organic materials. Over several weeks, the team compared results against baseline data collected from the older lighting setup. While the difference in preservation benefit was modest, the newer system offered greater flexibility and lower energy usage, leading to its quiet adoption in limited sections of the vault. Outside the Vatican, such developments remained entirely unknown. Yet for those within its walls, the project represented an ongoing truth: that the work of safeguarding history was a living process, adapting silently to new knowledge while preserving the unbroken continuity of centuries. In the end, the light itself, soft, measured, and almost invisible, mirrored the philosophy of the vault's guardians: to illuminate only what was necessary and nothing more. By mid-2030, a quiet collaboration formed between the Vatican and a select group of international conservators to address a particularly challenging preservation issue: organic relics whose age and fragility made them prone to natural decay despite optimal storage. These objects, some fashioned from wood, leather, or woven fibers, required treatments that balanced modern science with a deep respect for their sacred and historical significance. The process began with non-invasive imaging, using multispectral cameras to detect structural weaknesses and trace elements invisible to the human eye. In one case, faint decorative patterns emerged on a centuries-old ceremonial garment, patterns that had been thought lost to time. All conservation work took place in a secure, climate-controlled chamber adjacent to the vault, ensuring that the items never left Vatican custody. The treatments were minimal and reversible, designed only to slow deterioration rather than restore the artifacts to an artificial state. For the conservators, working within these walls was unlike any other assignment. Every movement was observed, every action documented in longhand by a designated scribe. Beyond the Vatican, there was no public record of the project, no press release to announce its progress. Yet inside, those involved saw it as a rare and privileged trust, a moment when the guardians of the vault quietly accepted help from beyond their own ranks, bound together by a shared mission to preserve the irreplaceable. It was a reminder that even in a place defined by secrecy, collaboration could take root, provided it served the greater duty of safeguarding history for those who might never see it. In late 2030, the Vatican marked the completion of a century-long preservation cycle for some of the vault's most extraordinary treasures, a process begun generations earlier and meticulously planned to span decades. This cycle ensured that each artifact, no matter how ancient, received a full reassessment at least once every 100 years. The final stage involved reviewing the most significant objects in both religious and historical terms, some of which had not been handled since the previous cycle in the early 20th century. Under the soft glow of filtered lights, custodians open reinforced cases and examine each piece with the latest non-contact imaging tools, capturing details invisible even to previous generations of scholars. These findings were committed to sealed archival records, destined to remain locked away until the next century's review. The completion of the cycle was not celebrated publicly. It passed without a word beyond the stone corridors of the Apostolic Palace. Yet for the keepers of the vault, it was a moment of quiet triumph, proof that the chain of stewardship remained unbroken, despite the shifting tides of history outside its walls. Some among them reflected that they would never live to see the next cycle, but took comfort in knowing their work was part of something that outlasted lifetimes. Beyond the Vatican, the world carried on, unaware that, deep beneath the heart of Rome, a chapter of care stretching across 100 years had just closed. Inside, the treasures returned to their darkened stillness, waiting patiently for the hands of those yet unborn to one day open their cases again. That was one layer. Take a moment, then subscribe, and we'll go deeper next time.